The bulldozer hit the stone before the sun ever cleared the ridge, and I swear to you, that sound did not belong to morning. It was not birds, not cattle shifting in the wet grass, not the old wind chime my wife used to love on the back porch. It was steel biting into limestone, history cracking open like a bone. I ran across the lower pasture with one boot half on and the other foot soaked through my sock, holding my phone up because some part of me, the part my father used to call my courtroom brain, already knew this was not going to be solved by shouting. And there she was, Marlene Voss, president of the Willow Creek Estates Board, standing beside a rented bulldozer in a cream-colored jogging suit, hair sprayed into place at 6 in the morning, holding a travel mug like she had just supervised the installation of new flower beds instead of the destruction of something my family had guarded for 4 generations. She looked at me, smiled the way people smile when they are used to being obeyed, and said, "Cole, maybe now you can stop pretending a muddy horse track is sacred ground." I remember the fog sitting low around her ankles. I remember the bulldozer operator looking anywhere but at me. I remember the broken stone lying in white pieces under the blade. And I remember thinking, not yet. Do not give her the show she came for. My name is Cole Mercer. I am 52 years old, and I have lived my whole life outside a little town in western North Carolina called Briar Fork, the kind of place where people still wave from trucks whether they like you or not, and if they do not wave, that is a message too. I shoe horses for a living, same as my daddy did, same as his uncle did before him, and I live on 70 acres that have been in the Mercer name since 1888, not because we were rich, because we were stubborn. And there is a difference most city folks do not understand until they try to move a fence line. My wife, Clara, passed 2 winters before all this happened. Ovarian cancer, fast and mean. The kind of sickness that makes you mad at sunlight for showing up like nothing happened. And after she was gone, it was just me and our daughters Lily May, trying to keep the farm breathing. Lily was 15 then, all elbows and opinions, with her mother's brown eyes and my bad habit of going quiet when I should probably say something. She had a red roan mare named Juniper, spoiled rotten, smarter than half the men I have met at the feed store, and every afternoon Lily would ride the old ridge path from the school bus turnoff down through the sycamores and across our back field. The same path my great-grandfather used to bring pack horses over the mountain, the same path that had carried church wagons, medicine riders, moonshiners, soldiers coming home, and children with fishing poles tied to their backs. We called it Mercy Trace, though the Cherokee families who walked that ridge long before any Mercer ever set a fence post had an older name for it, one my grandmother would say softly when she thought nobody was listening. At the eastern bend of the path stood a flat gray marker, not fancy, just local fieldstone with MT 1919 carved into the face, put there by my great-grandfather and his brother after a flood nearly washed the trail into the creek. To anyone else, it looked like a rock, maybe a little ugly, maybe inconvenient, but to us, it was a bookmark in the land, a reminder that people pass through and dirt remembers. Then Willow Creek Estates arrived. 31 new homes on the old Barlow apple orchard, all white trim, black shutters, mailboxes that matched, and front porches nobody ever seemed to sit on. The developers sold them a dream. Quiet mountain living with curated rustic charm, which is a funny phrase when your version of rustic comes with an app-controlled sprinkler system. The first time Marlene Voss crossed my property line, she came in a silver Lexus with the HOA emblem stuck on the door, a green willow tree inside a gold circle, like a bank logo trying to look spiritual. She was 60, maybe 61, retired from corporate fundraising in Charlotte, married to a man named Philip, who said almost nothing and owned a closet full of pastel golf shirts. Marlene had that smooth, polished way of talking where every insult arrives wearing lipstick. She stood by my fence with the rolled survey under one arm and said, "Mr. Mercer, our community has concerns about the condition and usage of this trail corridor." I said, "Morning to you too." She did not laugh. People like that never laugh unless they are the ones being cruel. She told me the HOA had reviewed preliminary maps and believed a portion of Mercy Trace interfered with their planned common green space, a meadow pavilion, she called it, with benches and native landscaping. Though I had seen their landscapers tear out actual native blackberry bushes 2 weeks earlier because thorns were not on brand, I told her the trail was on Mercer land, always had been, and that Willow Creek ended at the survey pins up by the split oak. She tapped the rolled paper like it was a judge's gavel and said, Boundaries can be interpreted, Mr. Mercer, especially when community safety is involved. That was when I should have understood her. This was never really about a trail. It was about control. Marlene had sold herself to those homeowners as the woman who could keep the world tidy, keep the mountain mud off their shoes, keep the old farms from reminding them they had moved into somebody else's history. And I was a problem she could point to. A man with a weathered barn, 2 hound dogs, horses that smelled like horses, and a path that cut through her perfect little brochure. I told her no, as politely as I could, because my mother raised me right and the army finished the job, and I even offered to walk the boundary with her. She smiled and said, "I think we both know this will be easier once you decide to cooperate." 3 days later, I got my first letter. Cream paper, embossed logo, words like nuisance, non-conforming, safety hazard, visual degradation. They fined me for tall grass along the fence, for a rusted gate, for a smokehouse my great-uncle built in 1906, and for livestock odor, which made me laugh so hard I nearly spilled coffee on the dog, because finding a horse farm for smelling like animals is like finding a church bell for ringing on Sunday. The total was $3,800. I called the county clerk, a woman named Denise Harper, who had known me since I wore braces and stole peaches from her brother's orchard. She listened, sighed, and said, "Oh, you were not in their HOA." I said, "I know." She said, "No, honey, I mean you legally cannot be. Your deed predates that subdivision by more than a century." I said, "I know that too." "Then why are you so calm?" she asked. "Because," I said, "people show you who they are faster when they think you are too dumb to keep records." After that, the complaints started coming like summer flies. Building inspector, zoning officer, animal control, agricultural runoff inspection. Somebody even reported that my forge was an illegal industrial operation, which would have been more impressive if the complaint had not described a blacksmith shop, like something from a medieval fair. Every officer who came out found nothing, or less than nothing, and most of them left irritated at the person who had wasted their morning. One animal control officer, a tired young man named Reggie Pike, checked every horse on the place, looked at Juniper's teeth, watched Lily explain feed ratios with the confidence of a small veterinarian, and finally said, "Mr. Mercer, I cannot put this in the report exactly this way, but whoever filed this is full of it." I thanked him. He hesitated by his truck and said, "Same name on all the complaints, Voss." That evening I went to town and bought 4 trail cameras, 2 pocket recorders, and a hardback notebook with numbered pages. Lily watched me lay everything out on the kitchen table like I was planning a bank robbery. "Daddy," she said, "are we in trouble?" I looked at her across the table, at the stack of HOA letters, at Clara's empty chair, at the rain tapping the kitchen window, and I told her the truth. "Not yet, baby. Right now we are just becoming very difficult to lie about." She nodded, but I could see fear working behind her eyes, and that hurt worse than the letters. A week later, she came home from school quiet, which was not natural for Lily, who usually came through the door telling 3 stories at once. One of her friends from Willow Creek had been told she was not allowed to ride at our farm anymore because her mother had heard we were unstable, dangerous, maybe under investigation. Lily stood in the barn aisle brushing Juniper too hard and asked me if people really believed that. I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to tell her adults were smarter than gossip. But grief had already taught both of us not to dress up the truth just because it was ugly. So I said, "Some people will believe anything if it lets them feel cleaner than somebody else." She stopped brushing and looked at me. Then, "When do we fight back?" I took the brush from her hand, softer than I felt, and said, "When she gives us the part she cannot take back." The part she could not take back came slower than I expected, which somehow made it worse, because a fast fight will get your blood up and burn itself out, but a slow one moves into your house, sits at your table, makes your child quiet at supper. For the next month, Marlene Voss kept smiling in public and cutting in private. Willow Creek people I had never met started slowing down by my driveway like they were touring a crime scene. And once, while I was unloading feed, a woman in tennis clothes rolled down her window and asked if my horses were licensed, which is not a thing, not in the way she meant it. But I told her Juniper had a driver's permit and was working on parallel parking. She did not smile. Marlene held wine nights on her back patio where she told folks the ridge path was a liability, a trespass route, an eyesore, and if you say a thing often enough while pouring Chardonnay, Some people star mistaking gossip for civic duty. Then, one Thursday night, I got a call from a man named Ben Calder, a retired mail carrier who lived 2 streets inside Willow Creek and spoke so quietly I could hear his refrigerator humming behind him. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I do not want my name dragged into this, but they voted tonight." I asked who voted. "The board," he said. Marlene pushed it through as emergency grounds maintenance, and they moved money into a discretionary account she controls. I wrote that down. Discretionary account. Emergency grounds maintenance. Then he said something that made the kitchen feel 10 degrees colder. She told them the work had to happen before you could get lawyers involved. I thanked him, and after I hung up, I sat there looking at Clara's empty chair again, because grief has a strange way of turning furniture into witnesses. The next morning I called Hal Rucker, my lawyer, who had an office above a bait shop in town and a voice so dry it could cure ham. Hal had handled Mercer land matters since my father was alive, and when I read him Marlene's notice, he made a sound halfway between a cough and a laugh. "Cole," he said, "these people have confused a subdivision covenant with the 10 Commandments." He sent a cease and desist by certified mail that same afternoon, thick enough to make a point, polite enough to be read by a judge later, and for 12 days after that, nothing happened. No letters, no inspectors, no Lexers at the fence, just quiet. Lily thought maybe it was over, and I wanted that for us so badly I almost let myself believe it. But men who shoe horses know the difference between a calm animal and one gathering itself to kick. At 5:38 on a Tuesday morning in late May, I woke up to the low grind of diesel. It was the kind of sound that reaches some old part of your body before your mind catches up. I was out of bed before I knew I had moved. Jeans, shirt, 1 boot, phone recorder, and Lily in the hallway whispering, "Daddy." I told her to call Sheriff Amos Keene, call Hal, and stay in the house, no matter what she heard. Then I ran, down through wet grass, past the lower barn, over the rise where the sycamores leaned together, and there it was, yellow bulldozer, mud on the tracks, blade down, chewing into Mercy Trace like it had been hired to erase memory. The old marker was already split, one half shoved into the dirt, the other half under the blade, and I saw the carved MT 1919 flash once in the grey morning before it disappeared under limestone dust. Marlene stood just beyond the scrape line in a pale blue windbreaker, pearls at her throat, travel mug in hand, with Philip behind her looking like a man who had mistaken silence for safety his whole married life. I lifted my phone and started recording. I said the date, the time, my name, her name, the property line, and that she was trespassing. She tilted her head and said, "Cole, you always did have a flair for drama." I said, "Shut that machine off." She took a sip of coffee. "The board has authorized restoration of common space." I said, "This is my land." She smiled. "That is your interpretation." The operator looked back over his shoulder. Nervous now. I remember feeling my anger rise up, clean and hot. But Lily's question was in my head, when do we fight back? And my answer came with it. When she gives us the part she cannot take back. So I did not touch her. I did not threaten her. I stood there recording while the blade took a second toss and ripped open the ridge path that my daughter rode home on. The one my daddy walked off to my mother's funeral. The one Clara and I used to take when we were young and too broke for dinner dates, carrying sandwiches and wax paper and pretending the moon had been put there for us personally. Sheriff Keene arrived 20 minutes later with 2 deputies and a face that looked carved out of church pewwood. He listened to Marlene explain community safety for exactly 11 seconds before he raised one hand and said, "Mom, I'm going to need you to stop decorating this crime scene with vocabulary." The bulldozer was shut down. The contractor was told to leave, and Marlene, still certain she was the tallest person in the room, handed the sheriff a folder of HOA maps like she was serving legal papers on the mountain itself. Amos glanced at them, then at me, then at the broken stone. "Cole," he said quietly, "you got anything old on this trail?" I almost said only everything. Instead, I thought of my grandfather's cedar chest in the attic, the one my father always called the war box. After the deputies left, after Lily came down barefoot with her hair tangled and her face too pale, we climbed the attic stairs together. The chest smelled like dust, cedar, mouse paper, and time. Inside were old ration books, my grandfather's army discharge, a photograph of my grandmother standing beside a mule, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, a county-recorded copy of a conservation instrument dated October 3, 1956. I spread it on the kitchen table. Lily stood beside me, one hand over her mouth. The document named Mercy Trace as an Appalachian indigenous and colonial-era travel corridor of historic and cultural significance placed under perpetual preservation easement with the state of North Carolina protecting the original path, both marker stones, and a 30-foot buffer from the trail center line. Perpetual. Recorded. Binding on successors and adjoining parcels. There are words that do not look powerful until you need them, and then they stand up off the page like armed men. Hal Rucker was at my house in 40 minutes. Suspenders crooked, hair uncombed, grinning in a way I'd never seen from a lawyer before breakfast. "Coal," he said. She did not step in a hole. She brought a shovel and dug to China. By noon, we had called the State Historic Preservation Office. By 3, a field archaeologist named Dr. Marion Bell was walking the torn path with a clipboard and the expression of a doctor looking at an X-ray she did not like. She told me Mercy Trace had been listed in a regional historic trail inventory since 1957, 1 year after my grandfather filed the easement. She also told me the Cherokee Cultural Office needed to be notified because the old name in the document matched a known travel route through the ridge. The next day, a Cherokee preservation representative named Thomas Redbird came out in a dusty pickup. Quiet man, gray braid, work boots, no performance in him at all. He stood where the marker had been, touched the broken stone with 2 fingers, and said, "Your grandfather wrote our name into this paper. Nobody did that by accident back then." That sentence sat in me heavier than anger. I had spent weeks thinking Marlene was attacking my property, my family, my pride. But standing there with Thomas beside that wound in the ground, I understood she had bulldozed something much older than my grief. Hal pulled records for 3 days. The Willow Creek Declaration from 2021 expressly excluded pre-existing easements. Their own map stopped above the split oak. Their common green space never touched Mercy Trace. Marlene had used HOA money to hire a contractor to cross onto private land and damage a protected historic corridor. Criminal, civil, maybe federal, Hal said, tapping each word on the table with a yellow pencil. Then Marlene came back, because arrogance is apparently solar-powered and rises every morning. She arrived with a lawyer from Asheville named Trevor Sloan, a sleek man with shoes too shiny for gravel. And they offered me $7,000 and a mutual non-disclosure agreement for the unfortunate confusion. Marlene said it with that same soft smile, like she was offering a coupon to a difficult customer. I looked at the check on the fence rail and asked if that was for the stone, the trail, my daughter's tears, or the 400 years they had not bothered to research. Trevor cleared his throat. Marlene's smile went thin. "Cole," she said, "you are letting sentiment cloud reason." I said, "No, Marn. Sentiment kept me from suing you last month. Reason is what you are meeting now." They left with the check. 2 days later, she started posting online, not naming me at first, just saying hostile neighboring landowner was preventing community improvements, that unregulated agricultural properties posed health risks, that certain men used heritage as a shield against progress. And then she posted a photo of my barn, taken from the road with the caption, "This is what happens when rural decay goes unchecked." Lily saw it before I did. She did not cry this time. She printed it. Then she printed every comment under it. That is when I knew Clara had left more in that girl than brown eyes. Hal opened a defamation file. Dr. Bell filed a preservation order. Sheriff Keene opened a criminal investigation. Marlene still thought she was winning because no one had knocked loudly enough yet. Then, 3 nights before the state hearing, at 2:17 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a trail camera alert. I opened the feed and saw green night vision. 3 figures at the broken marker site, one holding a flashlight, one kneeling with a garden trowel, and one standing with arms folded in a pale windbreaker. Marlene. They were digging up stone fragments, backing them like evidence could be made to vanish if you got cold enough and desperate enough before sunrise. I called Sheriff Keene. He said, "Stay inside." I did. I watched from my bedroom window while 2 cruisers came in dark. No sirens. One from the lane and one across the hayfield. The camera caught the exact moment Marlene looked up into the deputy's flashlight, her face white, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Philip was the one with the trowel. The third man was the contractor. And as Amos Keene put Marlene Voss in handcuffs on the same dirt she had called worthless, I heard Lily behind me in the hallway whisper, "Daddy, is that the part she cannot take back?" I looked at the glowing screen. at Marlene's pearls shining green in the night vision, and said, "Yes, baby, I believe it is." The state hearing was 3 days later, and by then the story had already started leaking out of Briar Fork like creek water through a cracked dam. First the county paper, then a station out of Asheville, then a reporter from Raleigh who left 3 messages with Hal Rucker and one very polite one with me, which I did not answer, because my daddy always said never talk when your lawyer is already paid to do it better. The courthouse that morning looked like somebody had scheduled a family reunion, a funeral, and a public hanging in the same hallway. Willow Creek homeowners stood in little nervous clusters, whispering into paper coffee cups. The older farm folks stood along the wall with their hats in their hands. Sheriff Amos Keene was there in his dress uniform. Dr. Marion Bell had 2 state attorneys beside her. Thomas Redbird came in wearing a dark jacket and a small silver pin shaped like a hawk, and Lily sat next to me wearing Clara's blue scarf, the one with tiny white flowers, folded around her shoulders like armor. Marlene Voss came in through the side door with Trevor Sloan and Philip behind her, and I will give her this. She knew how to dress for damage control. Navy suit, pearls, hair perfect, face calm enough to fool a camera, but not calm enough to fool me. People who are truly calm do not blink that much. Judge Elaine Porter took the bench at 9 sharp, a small woman with silver hair and a voice that made even the bailiff stand straighter. And for the first few minutes, Trevor tried to frame the whole thing as a boundary misunderstanding, a regrettable clash between rural tradition and modern community planning. I almost admired the nerve of it. He said the HOA acted in good faith. He said the maps were confusing. He said emotions had been inflamed by nostalgia. And when he said that word, nostalgia, Lily's hand tightened around mine so hard my knuckle popped. Then Hal stood up, slow as winter sunrise, and carried our first exhibit to the clerk. The 1956 preservation easement, then the 1919 survey, then the Regional Historic Trail Inventory from 1957, then Willow Creek's own declaration, the one that specifically excluded pre-existing easements, then the county parcel map, clear enough that a 3rd grader could follow it with a crayon. Hal did not raise his voice once. That was the beauty of it. He just stacked paper on paper until Trevor's good faith started looking less like confusion and more like a costume. Doctor, Bell testified next, explaining how Mercy Trace was not just an old farm path, but a documented travel corridor, and how the marker stones were not decorative. They were protected survey monuments tied to the easement. Thomas Redbird spoke after her, and the room changed when he stepped to the lectern. Some people bring authority with volume. Thomas brought it with stillness. He said his people had stories about that ridge, older than the county itself, older than the deeds, older than the courthouse we were sitting in. And then he looked at Marlene, not with hate, not even with anger exactly, but with the kind of disappointment that makes a person feel smaller than punishment ever could. "Mrs. Voss," he said, "you did not remove a landscaping obstacle. You tore into a road that carried our dead, our traders, our children, our names. You called it mud because you had not earned the right to call it memory." Nobody moved. I heard a woman behind me start crying softly. Even Judge Porter let the silence sit. Then came the videos. First the morning footage. The bulldozer grinding through grey fog. Marlene's voice clear as a bell. "Call. Maybe now you can stop pretending a muddy horse track is sacred ground." Then the night footage, green and ghostly. Philip mealing with the trowel. The contractor holding a flashlight. Marlene standing there with her arms folded like a woman waiting for a valet. Hal plays Marlene's sworn emergency petition on the screen beside it, the one where she had declared under oath that she had no knowledge of any protected resource being disturbed. Judge Porter leaned back and took off her glasses. That is never a good sign for the person being discussed. The district attorney rose then, calm, almost gentle, and listed what was coming. Destruction of a protected historic resource, criminal trespass, evidence tampering, perjury, conspiracy, misuse of association funds, and possible referral for federal review. With every charge, Marlene seemed to lose 1 more inch of height. Trevor objected twice. The judge overruled him twice. Then something happened I had not expected. Ben Calder, the retired mail carrier who had called me that first night, stood up in the gallery. He did not say a word. He just stood. Then Mrs. Albright from the feed store stood. Then 2 Willow Creek women stood. Then an older man I recognized from the gas station. Then the young mother whose daughter used to ride with Lily. Then half the back row. One by one, people stood facing the defense table, not shouting, not clapping, just standing there and refusing to let Marlene hide inside the word community anymore. Philip stared at the table. Trevor stared at his notes. Marlene looked around the room, and for the first time since I had met her, she had no polished sentence ready. Judge Porter ordered her held pending arraignment, and when the gavel came down, it sounded final in a way I felt in my chest. The rest took months because justice, like fence repair, always takes longer than angry people think it should. Marlene eventually pleaded guilty to felony evidence tampering and perjury, served 10 months, paid restitution, and was barred from serving on any HOA or non-profit board in the state. Philip took a plea for conspiracy and misuse of funds, paid a fine big enough to make Willow Creek people stop saying this was all exaggerated, and the contractor cooperated once he understood Marlene was not going to save him. Willow Creek estates did not disappear. Houses do not vanish because one woman gets caught playing queen, but the HOA was dissolved by court order, its accounts placed under supervision, and for one quiet, beautiful summer, nobody in that neighborhood told anybody what color a fence ought to be. The civil award came to just under $900,000. I did not keep it. I know some folks think I should have, and maybe they are right in some practical sense, because roofs leak and tractors die and daughters go to college, but Clara used to say money earned from pain needs a job or it turns poisonous. So we created the Mercy Trace Trust with Howe, Dr. Palm, Bell, and Thomas Redbird helping guide it. The trail was restored by people who knew how to touch old ground gently. New stones were cut from the same ridge quarry my great-grandfather used. The marker was reset, and a small sign went up telling the history from Cherokee Footpath to Mountain Wagon Route to Mercer Horse Trail. On the first anniversary of the bulldozing, we held a children's ride. I expected maybe 12 kids. 86 showed up. Horses came from 3 counties. Lily led the line on Juniper, wearing Clara's scarf under her riding jacket, and Thomas walked at the front, carrying a cedar staff. When they reached the new marker, Lily dismounted, unfolded a paper from her pocket, and read the names of every Mercer she knew who had walked or ridden that ridge. Her voice shook when she got to Clara, but it did not break. Then she added one more line of her own, and for everybody whose road was called nothing by somebody who never bothered to learn its name. I had to look away then, because there are some moments a man cannot hold and still pretend he is made of tougher stuff. So here is what I think about now when people ask if it was worth it. Marlene was wrong, no question, but she did not come out of nowhere. She came from a kind of community that rewards the loudest person with the cleanest clipboard, a kind of place where people confuse order with goodness and property values with character. And maybe that is the part we ought to argue about, because if 29 neighbors let one woman bully a farm, erase a trail, lie in their name, and spend their money, how much of the blame belongs to her, and how much belongs to everybody who stayed comfortable until the handcuffs came out? Tell me what you think. Was Marlene just one bad HOA president, or was she symptom of something bigger happening in neighborhoods all over America? If you have ever had a board, a neighbor, a landlord, a developer, or some self-appointed community guardian try to push you off what was yours, put your county and state in the comments and tell the story. I read them all. And if you believe calm people can still be dangerous when they keep receipts, hit subscribe, because next time I want to tell you about a retired fisherman on the Carolina coast whose bait shed smelled so bad the HOA tried to sue him until they found out what was buried under the dock.